What Andrea Hampton confirmed didn't arrive through a press release or a carefully worded statement passed along to gospel media. Her words came quietly, the way the most important truths usually do, in her own voice, on her own terms, to the people who had spent years waiting and wondering and lifting this family up in prayer without ever fully knowing what they were praying through. Those who have followed Wes Hampton's journey through the Gaither world noticed things long before any confirmation came. Small things at first, absences that didn't get fully explained, changes that fans mentioned to each other in comment sections and Facebook groups with the kind of tenderness that only grows out of genuine love. Questions surfaced that the family never quite answered, and not because something shameful needed protecting. Some truths simply belong to a family until that family decides the season is right to release them. Andrea decided the season had come. What she confirmed, what she finally spoke aloud after years of private struggle and quiet faith, is something the gospel community had been circling without ever landing on directly. Stay with us through this story, because what surfaces in the middle of it reshapes how you understand everything Wes has brought to that Gaither stage over the last several years. By the time this video reaches the 10-minute mark, you'll understand why this family's silence was never about secrecy. Survival is a better word for it. Wes Hampton joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 2005, stepping into a group carrying a legacy so rich and a fan base so devoted that a lesser singer might have buckled under the weight of that expectation. He didn't buckle. Within a few years, fans who had grown up watching the homecoming videos, who had watched Michael English and then Guy Penrod carry those high tenor lines with that particular, anointed clarity, found themselves speaking Wes Hampton's name with that same quality of reverence. His voice holds something that resists easy description. A purity lives in it, an unguarded openness that makes a listener feel like something private is being shared, even when Wes is singing to 10,000 people. When he steps to the microphone on I've Just Seen Jesus, or the anchor holds, something shifts in the room that goes beyond what training and technique can account for. People weep. People reach for whoever is sitting beside them. None of that is a small thing. That is ministry, working the way it was always meant to work. For millions of fans who discovered the Gaither homecoming world through those beloved video series, who watched them on Saturday mornings or passed them to their children, or pressed play in hospital rooms because nothing else reached them in quite the right way, Wes Hampton became part of the soundtrack of their faith. Not a celebrity, not a polished entertainer, a companion, a voice that showed up when it was needed most. And that's when things began to seem different with Wes, and why people who loved him started to worry. The first signs were subtle enough that many fans dismissed them without much trouble. A comment here about Wes looking tired, a thread there about whether he seemed fully like himself at a recent homecoming taping. Loyal fans pushed back the way loyal fans do, reminding each other that these artists carry full and complicated lives that don't belong to the public. That instinct was correct. What separated the concern from ordinary gossip was its source. This wasn't an audience hunting for scandal. These were people who had prayed alongside this man through speakers and screens for 20 years, and they wanted to know if he was all right. That question never stopped coming, because love doesn't let it stop. Wes kept performing through all of it. He kept showing up on stage with Bill Gaither and the vocal band, bringing that same warmth, pouring everything available into every song. But those who had watched him longest, who remembered his most vibrant early years with the group, sensed that something heavy was being carried. The smile was real. The worship was real, and still something was present underneath both of those things that the music couldn't quite conceal. Andrea Hampton stood beside him through every bit of it. And here's the thing about Andrea. She is not someone who courts public attention or uses her husband's platform to construct one of her own. By every account from people who know this family, she is a woman of deep faith and the kind of steady character you only fully appreciate when you learn what she has been quietly holding together across a long and difficult season. What she confirmed is this. Wes has been navigating a serious health journey, one that has required far more from him and from their family than anyone outside their closest circle had been allowed to understand. The specifics of what that journey has looked like, what it has cost his voice and his ministry and his place within the Gaither Vocal Band, carry more weight than most of the gospel community has yet had time to process. But what Wes said about it, and what Andrea confirmed separately in her own words, is the part of this story that gospel media has almost entirely passed over. That part is coming. Stay with us. Longtime Gaither fans will remember a moment from one of the homecoming tapings in recent years when Wes was singing, and something in the room shifted the way it only shifts when a performance stops being a performance and becomes something else entirely. Bill Gaither looked over at Wes during that moment with an expression that people in the audience and viewers at home both noticed and talked about afterward. The look of a man watching something that he understood was costing the singer in front of him more than the room knew. Bill Gaither built his life and his ministry on a specific conviction. The gospel travels farthest when carried by broken and mended, and still mending human beings who have earned the right to sing what they're singing. Polished professionals have their place, but testimony has always been the engine of what the homecoming world runs on. Wes Hampton earned his place in that world not only because of the technical gift, which stands among the finest in gospel music, but because of something evident underneath it. A sincerity that suggested this young man from Tennessee was singing from somewhere real. What we understand now is just how real that place has been. Over the years, Wes spoke in limited terms about health challenges, careful never to burden his audience, but restraint is admirable and consistent with everything this family has shown about how they carry their faith. But the cumulative effect of that carefulness left the people who loved Wes most, the very community that would have surrounded him, wondering and worrying without the full picture. Andrea's confirmation changes that, and the change matters. This is where the story takes a turn that nobody in his circle expected to become public in the way it has. What Andrea shared came not in an interview with a journalist or a statement handed to a media outlet, but in her own community of faith, among people she trusted, speaking in the direct and unguarded way that only comes when someone has been quiet long enough. She confirmed that Wes has been dealing with a health condition that has affected him more deeply and for longer than his public appearances ever revealed. People who were present when she spoke described the room going still in a way that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with recognition, the recognition of a woman who had walked a long road and arrived somewhere honest. Bitterness was absent from her words entirely. Fear, too, at least the kind of fear with nowhere to put itself, was gone from what she said. What remained was the language of a woman who had prayed through something long and hard and real, and who had reached a place not of easy resolution, but of genuine peace. The kind Paul described in Philippians as surpassing understanding, the kind that doesn't make sense from the outside, but is unmistakable when you're standing in its presence. Andrea confirmed that Wes pushed through performance commitments during periods when many people facing his situation would have stepped back entirely, and the decision to keep showing up was not made out of obligation or contractual duty. Wes Hampton believes, with the kind of conviction that goes all the way down, that what he does from those stages matters, that the people in those rooms and watching those recordings need what he carries to them in the music. She also confirmed something Wes himself had touched on in brief and careful ways over the years. His faith has been tested in this season in ways that have reshaped it, not broken it, reshaped it, the way metal comes out of fire, harder in some places, more refined, more honest about what it actually is. Anyone who has followed Wes closely will hear that and feel the truth of it, because the voice coming through in recent years carries something it didn't carry in 2005 or 2008 or even 2012. Weight lives in it now, earned weight, the kind that only comes from having walked through something and emerged on the other side still standing, still singing, still believing the words. Fellow Gaither artists have known more than they've said publicly, which is exactly as it should be. These are people who understand that a stage is a sanctuary, and a confidence is something sacred. Mark Lowry, who has never been a man to hold back when something genuinely moves him, has said in various settings that Wes Hampton stands among the finest human beings he has ever shared a stage with. Coming from a man who has shared stages with virtually everyone in gospel music, that is not a casual compliment. David Phelps, who understands as well as anyone what it means to have your voice and your health and your calling intersect in complicated ways, has spoken warmly and specifically about Wes in interviews over the past several years, and between these two tenors there exists a mutual regard that goes well beyond professional courtesy. It is the regard of two men who have each in their own way had to place the very instrument God gave them into God's hands and wait. Fans who have followed Wes most closely responded to Andrea's confirmation with everything that is best about this community. Prayer came first, then letters and notes of gratitude, and testimonies from people describing specific moments when one of Wes's recordings reached them in a dark place and served as the thing that kept them going. The gospel community doesn't always get everything right, but this it does with uncommon grace. It shows up for its own. For those of us who have followed Wes Hampton's journey through the years, who were present in spirit for the early homecoming appearances when he was still finding his footing in that extraordinary company, who watched him grow into one of the anchoring voices of the Gaither Vocal Band, who have pressed play on his recordings during our own hard seasons, What Andrea's confirmation delivers is both simpler and deeper than any headline can hold. The weight in the voice was real. The worship was not performance built on favorable circumstances. The faith that came through every time Wes stepped to a microphone was not the product of an easy life and uncomplicated days. It was the product of a man and a family who chose, again and again, to trust God with more than any of us knew they were carrying. And that changes how you hear the songs. Gospel music sometimes struggles to hold together the twin demands of professionalism and honesty at the same time, and Wes Hampton has been quietly doing both, at the highest level, while navigating something deeply personal. That most of us didn't know the full weight of it is not a failure on anyone's part. That is what extraordinary character looks like when it refuses to perform its own suffering. What this reveals about faith, the particular kind that sustains a person through a long and uncertain season with no guaranteed outcome, is something this community understands without needing it explained. We have all known people who carried more than they showed. We have been those people in various seasons of our own lives. We know what it costs to get up and give everything you have when everything feels depleted. And we know what it means to sing about the anchor holding when you are the one who needs the anchor most. And if you have been a fan of Wes Hampton since the early homecoming days, you know exactly what we mean when we say his voice has always carried more than notes. Testimony lived in it from the beginning. Now that we understand more of what that testimony was built on, the music means something new. What performance of Wes's has stayed with you over the years? Leave that in the comments, because the conversation that happens in this community is part of what makes it worth having. One more part of this story deserves attention, and most people haven't connected it yet. It has to do with what Bill Gaither has consistently done when artists in his family walk through the hardest seasons of their lives. Criticism has come his way occasionally, from people who don't fully understand what he built, for standing by artists through circumstances that other organizations would have handled very differently. When Michael English navigated the most public and painful failure of his career in the mid-1990s, Bill and Gloria Gaither did not cut him loose. What they did instead shocked the industry. They waited, they prayed, and when Michael was ready to come back, the door stood open. That is not sentiment. That is a theological conviction lived out in the way an organization actually operates when no one is watching for the good press it might generate. Wes Hampton's situation is a different one entirely. This is a health journey, not a public failure, but the principle underneath how the Gaither world operates holds just the same. People are not interchangeable. Voices are not replaceable. And the relationship between an artist and this ministry, when it is genuine, as Wes Hampton's clearly is, does not dissolve under the pressure of difficulty. Russ Taff's road through addiction and restoration and return, the way Bill walked alongside artists through illness and loss, and the ordinary devastations a human life contains, all of it points toward the same understanding that has defined this ministry from its beginning. The homecoming stage was always meant to welcome the honest testimony, not the polished one, not the cleaned-up version where everything has already resolved. The real one, offered in real time by real people, still in the middle of what they're singing about. Wes Hampton, by continuing to show up, by allowing Andrea to speak when the time came, by letting the weight live inside the music rather than waiting until the weight was gone, did something fully consistent with the deepest values of everything the Gaither world has stood for across 5 decades. He let the hard thing make the ministry more true. And that is a gift to every person who has ever sat in a homecoming audience, carrying something they couldn't set down, wondering if anyone else in the room understood what that felt like. What comes next for Wes Hampton and his family is something the gospel community will watch closely, not with the appetite of people hungry for drama, but with the faithfulness of people who have been given a reason to care and intend to honor it. The road ahead for Wes's health, for his place in the Gaither Vocal Band, for what his voice will carry into the next chapter, none of those questions have settled answers yet, and perhaps that unresolved quality is itself the most honest place to land. Because faith as Wes Hampton has lived it, and as Andrea Hampton confirmed it, was never about certainty. Continuing is what faith has always asked of them. Continuing is not a small thing. The world celebrates arrival, the moment of triumph, the healed testimony delivered from the far side of the valley, the standing ovation for the comeback. Stages get built for that story. Albums get recorded around it. But the continuing, the quiet and unglamorous daily decision to keep placing one foot in front of the other when the valley hasn't ended, that is the part of the faith walk that most people never see. Wes has been living that part. Andrea has been living it alongside him. The fact that they did so without demanding recognition, without making the struggle the centerpiece of the platform, speaks to a depth of character that deserves to be named out loud. For anyone watching this who has faced a long season of their own, a health challenge, a family hardship, the kind of waiting that offers no clear timeline, there is something specific in what Wes's story offers. When a man stands on a stage and sings about the faithfulness of God, and you now know something of what it cost him to stand there, the nature of the encouragement shifts. It no longer comes from someone untouched by doubt. It comes from someone who has doubted, pressed through, and shown up anyway. And that is the testimony that reaches the places in people where nothing easier can go. Bill Gaither understood this when he built his ministry, and he understood it every time he chose which voices belonged on that homecoming stage. Wes Hampton in this season has become a more powerful witness than he was before, not despite what he has been carrying, but because of it. The gospel community has a long and beautiful tradition of gathering around its own, in moments exactly like this one, showing up with prayer and presence, and the kind of loyalty that asks for nothing back. That tradition is visible in every message and letter that has poured in since Andrea spoke, from fans across the country who found Wes's voice during their own hard years, and want him to know that the gift he gave them is one they intend to return. Whatever comes next, the people who have followed this ministry for decades hold one conviction without wavering. Wes Hampton's story is not finished. The voice that stopped rooms, that carried testimony through seasons heavier than any of us knew, still has songs left to sing. The stage is still ahead of him, the moments still to come for people sitting in darkened auditoriums holding on to the last thread of their own faith. Those belong to the next chapter, not to this one. And the people who love him most believe that with the kind of confidence that is grounded in what they have already seen, a man who chose to keep singing, a woman who chose to speak when the time arrived, a family that allowed their faith to be visible in the hardest season, not only in the easiest one, that is a testimony. And every one of us who has heard it is better for it. If this story reached you, the next video will as well. We have been covering the journey of another Gaither Vocal Band artist through a season of unexpected change, and what came out of that situation, and what it means for the future of this music is just as worth your time.